The fancy restaurant Harvest and Hearth was one of the best in the city. Inside, soft lights made the polished wooden tables glow. Candles flickered, and the quiet sound of jazz music filled the air. People sat at their tables, laughing and enjoying their expensive meals. The waiters, dressed in smart uniforms, moved quickly and gracefully, carrying plates of delicious food and glasses filled with fine wine. It was a place for rich people. A place where everyone dressed in fancy clothes, talked in quiet voices, and ate food that cost a lot of money. That evening, a man walked in through the front door. He was tall and thin, wearing a simple brown hoodie over a gray t-shirt. His jeans were old and faded, and his shoes were worn out, not dirty but clearly used for a long time. His dark hair fell softly around his face, and his eyes looked calm. He didn't demand attention. He never did. The man was Keanu Reeves, a famous actor. People all over the world loved him for his movies and his kindness. But tonight he wasn't here as a celebrity. He wasn't here to be a Hollywood star. He just wanted to be a regular person coming to enjoy a meal at a restaurant. But this wasn't just any restaurant. It was his restaurant. Keanu had built Harvest and Hearth with love. He didn't just put money into it. He had a vision. He wanted it to be a warm and welcoming place where kindness came first. He didn't want it to be only for rich people or for those who wore expensive suits. He wanted everyone to feel comfortable. But how could he know if the restaurant was really following his dream? He couldn't check from a fancy office or through business reports. He had to see it with his own eyes. And tonight he was testing it. Keanu walked up to the front desk where two workers stood. The first was Olivia, a sharp-looking woman with her eyes focused on a tablet. She barely looked up. Next to her was Tyler, a young man who leaned slightly toward Olivia and whispered something. Then he chuckled. Keanu heard him. He had heard that kind of laughter before. But he smiled anyway. "Hi," he said gently. "Just me tonight. Can I get a table for one, please?" Olivia sighed as if he was bothering her. She didn't even look up from her screen. "We're full," she said flatly. Keanu looked past her into the restaurant. He saw 3 empty tables near the window. The white tablecloths were untouched, the chairs waiting for someone to sit in them. "I don't mind waiting," he said. "I can look at the menu while I wait." Tyler smirked. "We have a dress code," he said, glancing at Keanu's hoodie. His voice had a hint of amusement. "We usually serve a different type of crowd." Keanu felt the meaning behind those words. It wasn't just about the hoodie. It was about who they thought belonged there. He had heard this before. People treated him differently when he wasn't wearing expensive clothes. When he wasn't in a suit. When he wasn't walking down a red carpet with cameras flashing. Tonight he just wanted to be a normal guest. Keanu glanced over his shoulder again. More empty tables. Plenty of space. Plenty of room. More excuses. "I really don't mind waiting," Keanu repeated, his voice still calm. "I've heard the lamb dish here is really good." Tyler chuckled again, this time not even trying to hide it. "It's a $60 lamb dish," he muttered under his breath. Keanu didn't react. He had spent millions of dollars to help people in need. He had donated to hospitals, given away money to struggling workers, and lived simply despite his fame. But to Tyler he was just a man in a hoodie. Olivia didn't laugh, but she glanced at Keanu's clothes again. "We have a certain look here," she said, her voice cold. "And it's not casual." Keanu's jaw clenched slightly, but he kept his voice even. "So, you're saying I can't eat here because of my hoodie?" Olivia folded her arms. "I'm saying we don't serve guests who look like they just rolled out of bed." The words stung more than they should have. Keanu had been ignored before. He had been told he wasn't the right person for a role in Hollywood. He had stood in rooms where no one cared about him. But this was his own restaurant. His own dream. And the people working here were destroying it. "I see," Keanu said softly. At a nearby table, a woman looked toward him. She had been listening. Her eyes softened for a moment. Then she looked away, back at her wine glass. No one would speak up. Not for a man in a hoodie. Keanu took a deep breath. "Can I speak to the manager?" he asked. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Why?" she snapped. "Do you think complaining will change anything?" Keanu's eyes stayed steady. "No," he said. "But maybe listening will." Tyler rolled his eyes. Olivia picked up the phone. "Marcus, front desk," she said, her voice sharp. "We have a problem." A problem. That word sank into Keanu's chest. Was he a problem? Or was their attitude the real problem? A few minutes later, a man in a crisp shirt walked over. His name was Marcus and he was the manager. He looked important. Keanu held on to one last hope. Maybe Marcus would understand. Maybe someone in this restaurant still remembered what it was supposed to be about. But as soon as Marcus saw Keanu, his face changed. No warm smile. No welcome. Just a quick glance up and down, and then a small shake of the head. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice firm but polite. "We're not accepting walk-ins tonight." Keanu looked at the empty tables again. "Even with all those open seats?" he asked. Marcus didn't look. He didn't care. "Look," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "We have a certain image, a certain type of guest. And you're just not it." Keanu blinked. It wasn't just rejection anymore. It was erasing him. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about space. They didn't see him. And somehow that hurt more than anything. Keanu took a deep breath and nodded slowly. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to fight. But he had learned something very important tonight. His restaurant had lost its way. And tomorrow, everything is going to change. Keanu stood still. His hands hung by his sides, his fingers curled just a little. The warm brown hoodie he wore didn't feel so warm anymore. In fact, it felt colder than ever. Around him, the restaurant was full of life. Glasses clinking, forks tapping against plates, people talking and laughing. But to Keanu, all those sounds felt far away, like he was listening from behind a thick glass wall. Marcus's words echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. "You're just not the kind of guest we serve here." Keanu took a deep breath, trying to push down the ache in his chest. This wasn't the first time someone had judged him by how he looked, but hearing it here in his own restaurant felt like a heavy punch to his heart. This place was supposed to be different. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was calm but strong. "Are you saying I'm not welcome?" Marcus didn't hesitate. His arms stayed crossed over his chest. "I'm saying," he repeated, "we have standards. If you don't meet them, that's not my fault." And there it was. A wall. Cold. Unmoving. Keanu stared into Marcus's eyes, searching for something. Some kind of regret. A moment of realization. A flicker of the reason this restaurant was built in the first place. But there was nothing. No understanding. No apology. Just arrogance. Nearby, Lily, a young waitress, stood frozen with a tray of water glasses. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked back and forth between the two men, her wide eyes full of worry. Then, after a deep breath, she spoke. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, that's Keanu Reeves." Her words sliced through the air like a knife. The entire restaurant seemed to stop. Marcus's confident expression faltered for just a second. A flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe even panic, crossed his face. But then it was gone, replaced by confusion. "What?" Lily swallowed hard and took another shaky breath. "He's the owner. Our owner." Olivia, another worker, let out a laugh, short, disbelieving. "No way," she said, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You're joking. This guy." Keanu didn't answer. He didn't have to. He simply looked at her. And in the silence that followed, his gaze said more than any words could. Around the restaurant, heads turned. People stopped eating. Forks were frozen in midair. The air was thick with tension, the weight of realization pressing down on every single person in the room. Marcus's face turned pale. His mouth opened, but his voice cracked. "Mr. Reeves, I..." Keanu didn't flinch. "That's Keanu Reeves," he repeated, his voice steady. "Didn't realize what, Marcus?" His tone was quiet but sharp. "Didn't realize who I was? Or didn't realize you just judged a man by his clothes?" Marcus opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. He had no words. Keanu's dark eyes burned, not with anger but with something deeper. Disappointment. A quiet kind of fury that didn't need to shout to be heard. "You saw a hoodie," he said, his voice like a blade, "and you decided I didn't belong in the very place I helped create." Olivia shifted uncomfortably, pressing her lips together. Tyler, another worker, looked down at the floor. The smirk he had worn just moments ago was completely gone. Lily still held her tray, but her hands trembled a little more now. "This restaurant," Keanu continued, looking around the room, "was meant to be warm. A place where everyone felt welcome. Not a place that judged people by their clothes or their wallets." He turned his sharp gaze back to Marcus. "If this is how you treat me, someone who owns this place, how many others have you turned away without a second thought?" Marcus opened his mouth, desperate to speak. "Mr. Reeves, I..." "No." Keanu lifted a hand. His voice was still calm but firm. "Don't apologize. Apologies are easy. What I want is harder." He stepped forward. The restaurant held its breath. "I want to know what you're going to do to fix it." Marcus had no answer. And in that moment, his silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. For a few long, heavy seconds no one moved. The familiar hum of the restaurant was gone. The only sound left was a spoon clinking against the floor, like an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence no one had expected. Keanu stood tall. His hands stayed at his sides. His face was calm, but his presence filled every corner of the room. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to argue. His silence was heavier than anything else. And everyone felt it. Olivia still had her arms crossed, but now, it looked more like she was trying to hug herself, like she was shielding herself from the shame burning inside her. Her voice, which had been sharp just moments ago, was now barely a whisper. This has to be a mistake. Keanu didn't answer. He had nothing to prove. Tyler had taken a step back. His eyes darted away from Keanu's, his body stiff. The smirk that had once been on his face was completely gone. Marcus stood inches away, his jaw tight, his face pale. He looked like he had just lost something important. But it was too late. The truth was already out. Everyone had seen it. Lily still stood nearby, holding her tray. Her hands shook slightly, but there was something different in her eyes. She had spoken up, not because Keanu was famous, but because it was the right thing to do. I didn't know who you were, Olivia whispered again. Her voice was small, thin. If I had known. Keanu turned to her. His voice was quiet but unshakable. That's the problem. His words settled in the air like dust, covering every person in the room, not just Olivia. The guests, the servers, the managers, every person who had watched and stayed silent. Every person who had judged someone for how they looked instead of who they were. Keanu let his gaze sweep across the restaurant. How many others have walked in here, he asked, wearing the wrong clothes, the wrong jacket, the wrong skin, and been turned away? No one answered. No one could. This isn't just about me, he continued. It's about what this place was supposed to stand for. Respect, warmth, human decency. He looked Marcus in the eyes. And tonight, I learned the people I trusted with my vision don't understand it at all. Marcus's lips parted, but Keanu lifted a hand once more. Don't explain. Don't make excuses. Just listen. Silence. Heavy. Then Keanu said, a mistake doesn't define you. What you do after it, that's who you are. He stepped back, gave them space. The restaurant was still frozen, but not out of fear, out of reflection. And for the first time that night, Keanu wasn't the one who felt out of place. It was the people who had forgotten what kindness really meant. The room was very quiet. Nobody wanted to interrupt him now. Not the guests, not the workers, not even the people who had ignored him before. This place was never supposed to be only for some people, Keanu said. His voice was calm but strong. It was supposed to feel like home for everyone. But somewhere along the way you stopped being kind and started acting like some people were more important than others. Tyler moved a little. Marcus let his arms drop. Olivia didn't look so confident anymore. But Keanu didn't yell. He didn't have to. His calm voice was stronger than shouting. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to make a big scene, Keanu said. But I am here to show you the truth. He looked around at everyone, workers and guests. Nobody had spoken up earlier, but now they were listening. His eyes met Lily's for a second, and for the first time, there was kindness in them. Because if this can happen to me, he said, imagine how often it happens to people who don't have a famous face like mine to help them. The room stayed silent. Then Keanu looked at Marcus. So I'll ask again. What are you going to do about it? Marcus swallowed hard. For the first time he didn't sound like a boss. He sounded like a person facing something difficult. I don't know, he admitted. But I want to fix it. Keanu gave a small nod. Then start by seeing people, he said. Not just their clothes, not just their titles. See them as people. He paused, then added, because the next time someone comes in wearing a hoodie or looking tired from work or feeling nervous because this place feels too fancy for them, I want to know that you'll treat them like they belong here. Olivia finally looked up. Her voice was shaky. I want to do better. Keanu's voice softened, not because he felt sorry for her, but because he believed she could change. Then prove it, he said. He stepped back, leaving them in silence. Not as a punishment, but as something for them to think about. Then he walked to an empty table and sat down. He didn't leave. He didn't yell. He just stayed, letting everyone think about what had happened. For the first time, people weren't just looking at him like a movie star. They saw him as someone who expected better from them. The door hadn't even closed behind Keanu when the room felt different. Not like a big sigh of relief, but like people realizing they had been ignoring their feelings for too long. Olivia stood behind the podium where she greeted guests. Her shoulders were stiff. Her hands pressed against the wood as if she needed to hold on to something. Her mind kept replaying the night. She remembered telling him to leave without a second thought. She remembered her voice, the way she had felt comfortable being rude. But now it didn't seem right. It felt small and mean. Tyler leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His usual smirk was gone. He was quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because, for once, he wasn't sure if what he said would even matter. Lily moved between tables, picking up empty glasses. But she wasn't really thinking about the dishes. She kept looking at Keanu, who was now sitting at a table looking at a menu. He hadn't stormed out. He hadn't shouted. He had just stayed, letting everyone feel the weight of their actions. Marcus stood at the edge of the dining room, hands behind his back. He looked around with an expression that showed he had lost something important. He had always cared about keeping the restaurant looking perfect, making sure everything was in order. But now that didn't feel as important anymore. What was the point of making everything look perfect if it meant treating people badly? The workers didn't talk to each other, not yet. Words felt too small for how big this moment was. Instead, they moved carefully, thinking about everything they did. Every glance, every hello, every little action suddenly felt important. The storm was over, but the feeling it left behind stayed. And now the biggest question was, would they change because they had to, or because they truly wanted to? In the days that followed, things at the restaurant called Harvest and Hearth felt different. The lights were still soft. The food was still fancy. The wine still poured smoothly. But underneath it all, something had changed. The workers, the servers, the hostesses, the managers, moved with more care. They knew someone might be watching. They knew every word, every little action mattered. Then one day, without warning, Keanu came back. This time he wasn't wearing a hoodie. He wasn't trying to blend in. He wore a simple black shirt and dark jeans. Still simple, still quiet, but now impossible to mistake. This time, nobody was confused about who he was. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze for a second. Olivia was the first to see him. She stood up straighter, her hands resting gently on the podium. But this time there was no fake smile, no nervous, rehearsed apology. Only honesty. Only readiness. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves," she said softly. "It's good to have you back." Keanu looked at her for a moment. Not in a way that judged her, but in a way that noticed things. He could tell her voice was different now. She wasn't scared, she was showing respect, real respect. "It's good to be back," he said. His voice was warm but calm. Marcus stepped forward from the dining room. His posture was careful but steady. He didn't look like someone trying to protect the restaurant's image anymore. He looked like someone taking responsibility. "Mr. Reeves," Marcus said quietly, "allow me to take care of your table myself." Keanu gave a small nod. He didn't give a big smile. He didn't make small talk. This wasn't about pretending. This was about trust. He followed Marcus through the restaurant. He looked around, seeing walls he knew and faces he didn't. Some people glanced at him but said nothing. Some had been there that night. Some had read about it later. But everyone knew this moment was important. Keanu sat down. Lily came with a menu. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were kind. "We're glad you came back," she said. Keanu looked up at her. For the first time since he came in, he smiled just a little. "So am I." The table was ready. The room was quiet. Now the real test is about to begin. It was a calm Tuesday evening when she walked in. No big group. No fancy clothes. Just a woman in her late 40s wearing a soft gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was tied back neatly. She walked in with confidence, but there was something careful about her steps. A little bit of doubt in her eyes, like she was waiting for someone to say she didn't belong. Olivia stood at the front, looking at the woman as she walked up. There was a pause. Before, this moment might have been filled with judgment. But now something had changed. Olivia stood up straighter, looked her in the eyes and smiled gently. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" The woman shook her head. "No, I was hoping to find a table for one." Olivia didn't hesitate. No eye roll. No rude look. "Of course," she said warmly. "We'll have you seated in just a moment." She picked up a menu and led the woman to a quiet table by the window. No questioning her. No checking what she was wearing. Just kindness. From across the room, Lily noticed. She had seen this woman before. Once, briefly. She was a close friend of Keanu's, someone who stayed out of the spotlight. And tonight she had come alone. Not to eat but to watch. It was a quiet test. Olivia didn't know. Tyler didn't know. Marcus didn't know. And that made their actions more honest. The woman ate her meal quietly. She watched more than she talked. She saw Tyler welcome a casually dressed couple without hesitation. She watched Marcus help a new server carry a heavy tray without being asked. She saw Lily kneel down to comfort a child who had spilled a drink. No one got mad. Just kindness. No one knew they were being tested. And that was the point. When the woman left, she stopped at the front. "Thank you," she said to Olivia. Olivia smiled. "We're glad you came." That night, Marcus's phone rang. It was Keanu Reeves. A voice on the line said, "I heard." There was a pause. "You passed this time." His mother walked beside him, her arm gently holding his. His dreams had been peaceful. His mother walked beside him. This time she was with him. His mother walked beside him, holding his arm gently. Behind them were two longtime business partners and a few close friends. People who had been with him through years of movies, hard times, and rebuilding. When they stepped inside, no one panicked. No one whispered. No one rushed to stare. Olivia stood at the front, calm. She greeted them, not with formality but with warmth. "Welcome back, Mr. Reeves," she said. She looked at his mother and gave her a warm nod. "And welcome everyone. We're honored to have you." Keanu smiled. A real smile, easy and relaxed. "You remember what I said?" he asked gently. Olivia's eyes didn't move away. "Yes. You said next time, you wanted to be just another guest." She stepped aside and led them to a big round table in the middle of the room. No special treatment. Just respect. Lily took care of their table that night. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were bright. Her hands were careful. She didn't act differently because he was Keanu Reeves. She didn't serve differently because of who sat with him. She just did her best like she always did. That was now the rule. Across the room, Tyler helped an elderly man to his seat, pulling the chair out for him. Marcus saw a nervous new waiter and quietly fixed a tilted plate on his tray, giving him a small nod to say, "You're doing okay." None of it was for show. This was who they were now. At the end of the meal, Keanu stood up. The restaurant became quiet. Not because they were scared, but because they respected him. They admired him. "What you've done here," he said, looking at the staff and the guests, "is more than fixing a mistake. You've chosen to build something better." He paused, eyes steady. "That's..." He turned to Olivia. "I'm proud of you." Olivia blinked, holding back the emotion rising in her chest. As Keanu and his guests left, the room didn't go back to how it was before, because it had become something new. Not just a restaurant, a legacy. Keanu didn't leave angry. He didn't yell to prove a point. Instead, with quiet strength and steady presence, he turned an unfair moment into a chance to grow. He showed everyone that true kindness isn't about how we treat famous people. It's about how we treat the people we don't always notice. And in his silence, he taught a lesson louder than any speech. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.